At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Holiday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Holiday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner, by knockout, is Holiday. Holiday, bring it on.
You are your safe space to your kids, so they're going to act out and push boundaries and do all of that. So I'll experience that more at home, but it's out in the world. I want our kids to, instead of being like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, how do you want to contribute to society? Like how you talk about just like being loving and engaging and healthy. Like that's all I want for my children. And it's like, how do we foster that?
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives while striving to be the best versions of ourselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about, while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is called Miraculous Mamas, and I am so excited to introduce you to our guest, Elizabeth Joy. Elizabeth is a doula, a mother, and also a fellow podcaster. In her original, unfiltered, true-to-life podcast, Miraculous Mamas, Elizabeth gets very real with her industry experts, celebrities, and moms discussing in-depth topics like motherhood, pregnancy, childbirth, and many other pressing women's issues. It's for anyone who's looking for a safe and honest place without judgment, where they laugh, cry, and hot flash about every female topic from pregnancy, sex, to postpartum depression, and much, much more. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So there's so much I want to ask you, and it's always, as you know, like where to start. So where I decided to start is your road to becoming a doula. If you could tell everyone, like not everyone knows what a doula is and the role of a doula, but let's get the backstory first on how you came into that, this line of work, and I would say more of a line of living, even more so than work.
Yes. So it started a long time ago. So I lived in Vegas for about 12 years. And while I was living there, my sister was there as well. And she got pregnant. And at the time, Vegas, which still has a really high C-section rate, had the highest rate in the country. So about a 40% C-section rate, which means almost half of the moms going into birth were ending up in C-sections. And when you look at like the World Health Organization, they recommend that a country's rate be 10 to 15%. We're at 34% nationwide. And we were both clueless. She's a few years older than me. She's pregnant with her first kid in her mid-20s, goes to the doctor, and the insurance had messed up her medical records and switched them with somebody else's. And because of this, it ended up being this huge thing with insurance and coverage. So her and her husband looked for other options, and they ended up finding a midwife to do a home birth. And that was like my first introduction to it. I think I was 21 years old, and I was there for her birth. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like life-changing, seeing a life come into this world. And it just kind of always stuck with me. So a few years later, a lot of my friends were getting pregnant and having babies. And we're ending up in these situations that to me just didn't sound right. Being like, yeah, my doctor told me my baby's too big, so we just scheduled a C-section. I'm like, really? Like, is that a thing? And so I started researching and learned about doulas and got really into it. I took some courses, I attended some births, and then I was still kind of figuring out what I was doing in my life. I feel like my whole 20s was basically me trying to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And so I traveled, did a few other things. I took a course to become a life coach, which was really cool. And then I just kept coming back to the doula work. I'm like, I really want to help people feel empowered in their birth, because when you're being told you can't do it in that phase, when do you start feeling like you can in motherhood? When do you start feeling like, oh, I got this now? But in birth, I was told, oh, you can't do this. Oh, you have to do it this way. And a lot of stories I was hearing, people felt like birth was happening to them, not that they were actually a part of the experience. So I just became really passionate about it and went to go do my recertification because I didn't finish the course before. So a couple years ago, I just really started focusing on the doula work and got a job here in Chicago at a hospital that employs doulas. So I work with 3 other doulas with a midwife group, which has been a really cool experience. I definitely miss taking clients on my own. So I'll probably go back to that eventually, but it's definitely been a learning experience being in the hospital. And then I wanted the podcast because there's so much information out there that's that you don't know. Like, I have so many pregnant people reach out to me and they didn't know that they had different options. They didn't know like actual numbers and research and statistics. And I think that there's a misconception with doulas that if you're going to have a doula, you're going to have a home birth, an unmedicated birth. And that's not the case at all. Like, I just gave birth in September and I ended up getting an epidural, but I felt empowered making that decision because I knew the research. I had a doula there with me. My midwife was so supportive. There was informed consent with every decision made along the way. And I knew in that moment that that's what my body needed. And so I wanted other people to feel that way. And with the podcast, I just wanted to bring on people to share their stories. And then even getting into some of the parenthood stuff, motherhood, all aspects of life, because it can definitely feel like an isolating place sometimes. We don't live in community like we used to. So just people sharing their stories so that you're feeling validated in yours.
I think it's so, I've never thought about it as you just said it, whereas your beginning experience of being a mother, it starts with how much control or lack of control you have in the pregnancy process, the birthing process. And I think that's profound. Like, that's really impactful to think about how decisions can be made or maybe are being made for people without them even knowing that they have decisions. And so why was that statistic so high? Like, just so we can get a sense of why are there higher rates of C-sections in certain parts of the country than others?
Well, some of the higher places are in lower income areas where people just aren't given options. And there's some systemic racism happening. You see, like, Miami's huge for C-section rates. And in different areas, it's always different reasons. It's pretty high, again, nationwide. So it kind of goes back to the 1990s when there was a lot of different information that came out about VBACs, which is a vaginal birth after a cesarean, and whether they were safe or not. And the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists kind of took a stance on it, saying you can get a VBAC as long as we feel that it's safe as long as there's an anesthesiologist available. Well, not all places had an anesthesiologist on call 24/7, always available. And that just kind of changed some of the way that people practiced. And then it kind of got viewed as an unsafe practice when it's really not. It can increase the chance of placental abruption, but it's like by 0.3%. So a doctor can tell you like, oh, well, with a VBAC, your chances of this happening go up by 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear that and you're scary. But when you actually look at the numbers, you're like, oh, 0.1% to 0.3%. That's a
Mm-hmm.
statistic I deserve to know to make that decision for myself, whether I want to try or not.
Right.
So like the practice that I work at, we have a 75% VBAC rate, which
Mm.
is huge.
Yeah.
Most places don't have that at all. And we only have a 7% C-section rate. So it's pretty incredible to like be in that practice and see the evidence-based
Mm-hmm.
like options that are happening, that people are informed of their decisions, that we will do everything we can to have a birth happen the way that you envision. But obviously there are times when there's unplanned things that happen.
Sure. And obviously you're at a very progressive place that you have doulas and midwives on staff. That's wonderful. And as you just pointed out, for everyone listening, obviously there's reasons for C-sections. There's medical reasons that you know in advance that why you will need one. There's things that can go wrong during unexpected things during a delivery. So how about this other side of it? I mean, because C-section, outside of that, C-sections seem very convenient. They can be scheduled for everyone, and also I'm guessing they cost more. I don't want to get into all this, but I'm like, is there a healthcare insurance reimbursement thing going on as well?
Well, I mean, it's definitely more convenient and more expensive. And a part of it is, yes, like if you've already had your first C-section, then we can just schedule the second one. That's it. And then even with the first-time moms, looking for reasons, there are some practices that do that, but definitely not all. There's a lot of places that aren't trying to just make it a baby-making factory.
Mm-hmm.
There are places that are. Like I didn't work at the hospital, but I've had clients that go to the same hospital and every single birth has ended up in a cesarean because that's how they operate. And almost everyone I know who's gone to this hospital has gotten one.
Yeah.
Because they just kind of push it. It's like, oh, you've been in labor 12 hours. I think it's time for a C-section.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like birth isn't linear. Every experience is so different. So you definitely do see some of that. I want to give most people the benefit of the doubt and think that they're not just trying to do that. But then there's also standards of practice that once people have kind of been practicing the same way and they're like, well, I know that if we schedule it, if we do this, then the baby's going to be safe. You're going to be fine. We're going to get in, we're going to be out. Everything's going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like maybe in birth, some things could go wrong, but I mean, things can go wrong at any point. Or they can go perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So I just find it very interesting that in the majority of the world, like if you look at Europe, the entry-level care for pregnant people is midwifery care. And then if they are high, what's the word I'm looking for? High risk.
High risk, high cutie. Yes. Yep.
Yes. And then if they're high risk, then they go to an OB, which is just not something that you see here in the States. Is everyone kind of goes to OB, and midwifery also kind of has that misconception that, oh, if you're going to go to a midwife, you have to have this like hippy dippy,
right?
Everyone chanting home birth, which just isn't the case at all.
So tell us the difference, like midwife, doula. What's different? How do they overlap? And what are the roles?
Yeah, so doulas are very different from midwives. Midwives, depending on where you live, have different levels of certification. So in order to practice, I'm in the state of Illinois, I live outside Chicago. You have to be a certified nurse midwife, which means you had to have been a nurse first, a registered nurse, and then gone on to receive your midwifery degree. So a lot of them, they practice in hospitals for years first, and then go on to receive their degree. A lot of people have their master's in midwifery here, and that's how a lot of the states operate. Some places you don't have to have had any necessarily formal medical training, but you go through a midwifery program where you do receive medical training through their program, and it's more of a certification process. In a lot of states, that is not really seen as like a legal way to do it, although people still hire those midwives and use them. That was what was used. This is super interesting. So that's what was used in the country for a really long time. And if you look at Alabama, Margaret Charles Smith was like a midwife in Alabama for years, and she was a Black midwife there. And over 30 years, she did not lose one mom.
Wow.
And when they made that, she wasn't a formally trained midwife. It was part of their generational training. They practiced what they knew, they passed it down. Once they made it illegal and forced women to start going to the hospitals, they started dying. And we have the highest maternal death rate in the United States today versus the other high income nations. Like, we have a higher maternal death rate than Lebanon, than Turkey, than Kazakhstan, countries where you think, oh, the women are probably not treated as great there. But here, our death rates increased in the last 20 years. More women are dying than our parents' generation. So it's pretty interesting when you look at those statistics and how they changed that. But even there's states now where midwifery is illegal. But I know people who still used them. I've never attended a birth with an illegal midwife, but it's just super interesting. So all of them have received a different level of training. In order to be a doula, you don't have to receive any medical training. We go through a certification process. I don't perform any medical tasks. So I will never do a cervical exam. I won't even take your blood pressure, anything like that. I am a trained labor expert, and I provide informational, physical, and emotional support to my clients. So I will help you develop a birthing plan, come up with the options that are good for you, make sure that you're with the right provider. And then when you go into labor and delivery, it's a lot of physical work. We do provide a lot of, we do like hip squeezes, counter pressure, suggesting different positions, supporting you, helping with the information. So when the doctor comes in and is like, hey, I think we need to do this intervention, kind of interpreting some of that for you, because we know most of the medical terms and some of the alternatives that might work. We want to support your birth plan, but also know that plans don't often go right as we plan them to. And also help with your partner too. Your partner sometimes needs a break. They might not know how to help you. So we help the partner help you. And then I know a lot of midwives who are kind of trained doulas and then become midwives. So we don't necessarily overlap. I would just say that a lot of times when people hire a midwife, they also hire a doula. That's kind of where the overlap is. And then also a lot of similar beliefs surrounding birth.
Do you find yourself in, I imagine, a trusted advocacy role when things are starting to happen in the room and decisions need to be made that are not like consistent with the plan? So are you more an interpreter or also a guide? How do you manage those situations?
It's really hard because advocacy is a part of doula work, but also at the same time, we aren't trained medical providers, and I will never make a decision on my client's behalf. So one thing that I choose to do is if the doctor is like, I think we need to do this thing, and the client looks at me, I always say, can we have some time? And then have time to talk it out. And that's where I'm like, listen, like, here is the pros, here's the cons, here's maybe ask, hey, can we give it more time? Let's revisit this in a couple more hours. I want to give my body more time. And kind of help them come up with questions to ask and then assess, how severe. So, because a lot of times you change your mind in birth. I wasn't planning on getting an epidural, but after feeling like my legs were being ripped off of my body, I decided to. So, and there's been births where things weren't going as planned. And I've been like, maybe you do need to get an epidural, and it can be an amazing tool to help relax your body, be able to allow it to open for the baby to come down. It can definitely help out a lot in situations where maybe there's been sexual trauma or other things like that have happened. So it's a fine line with the advocacy thing, because we're always there to support our client. And my biggest thing is to make sure that they're feeling heard and validated. But I mean, we're never going to like overstep on a doctor's, but just letting them know you still have a choice. You have a choice. Like, obviously if it's like life or death, then they're going to let you know.
Yeah. And I think that's key for everyone to listen, is the idea of choice, and having someone with you who can help you and like create time, create space, help interpret what's going on, particularly in sometimes very high stress situations, is really, really a gift. And what this is making me think of is my wife is a former neonatal intensive care nurse and former labor and delivery nurse, all before we had our first child. And while she was pregnant, there were times when she's like, I know too much. You're like, I know a lot about things that can happen, and I'm trying to put that aside. So my question for you is, given what you've seen and what you knew and all of what you've experienced prior to having your first child, how did you process all of that information?
Yeah, I felt like going through it kind of like reopened a lot for me. Because I would try to give myself the same advice I'd give my clients, but it wouldn't really work. So,
Yeah.
I think for me, the pregnancy was, I'm lucky. I had a really easy pregnancy. Toward the end, I had really bad like sciatica and hip pain, but like I felt great. I never threw up. I loved being pregnant. I absolutely loved it.
You're one of those, right? They're the people that go like, oh my God, you had that. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But I was preparing my body before pregnancy. I'd worked with like I had some hormone issues going on. I worked with like a doctor, a naturopath to like balance some things out, to make sure I was nutritionally, all my nutrient panels were good. I wasn't like deficient. And, but labor was not, was not what I thought it was going to be.
Mm.
And that's like where doulas, where I come into play. And even my midwife, like my labor was very weird. And my doula and my midwife are like, yeah, I was like puking my brains out when I was only 5 centimeters dilated.
Mm.
Like it was horrible. And she was kind of stuck. She was coming in sideways. It's called like asynclinic. My cervix was swollen. Just like a lot of factors that weren't going in my favor. She was sunny side up. And I had done all the things, right? Because I'm a doula. I did everything to make sure she was in the right position. I was doing spinning babies every day. I was doing curb walking. I was doing all the stretches and exercises to make sure she was the right position. And she wasn't. So it was hard because I thought when I went into labor, I'm like, either I'm going to wait too long and we're going to have this baby in the car, or I'm going to get to the hospital and they're going to be like, you're 2 centimeters dilated. And I'm going to be like, what? And that's exactly what happened. We got to the hospital and I was 2 centimeters dilated. And, I mean, I do think that you can know too much, but in the same time, I kind of felt more empowered. Like, again, I knew what my options were. Like I knew at any moment what I could ask for and that I wouldn't feel bad about it because I knew the risks, the benefits. I knew the statistics of what are the percentages of things that could go wrong. Where I delivered has an amazing NICU in their hospital, which our daughter actually ended up in the NICU for a week. So it wasn't at all what I planned. I'm like, I'm going to have this unmedicated birth. It's going to be so wonderful. We're going to bring our daughter home. And that just wasn't it at all for me. And I really think that it was something that I had to go through just to kind of enhance even my doula practice and to make me more empathetic. And something that my husband and I had talked about, like one of the reasons we decided to birth where we did, we birthed where I work because I knew the midwives there. I knew the doulas. I felt really comfortable. The nursing staff is like amazing. The labor and delivery nurses there are just awesome. And so I felt comfortable going there. But we had talked about, is home birth an option? Is a birthing center an option? And I always pictured that I would have home births. But after doing a lot of research, I learned that first-time moms have a really high transfer rate with home births. And when people hear transfer rate, a lot of times they think that something horrible happened, and that's not it. It's they hit a point where they're like, I need an epidural, I'm going to the hospital, or the midwife's like, the baby looks like they're stuck. We really need to head to the hospital just to make sure that everything's okay. They're not life or death situations, but they're just like precaution, or the client changes their mind and is like, give me the drugs. And I just didn't want to take that risk because I'm like, I don't want to be in the middle of labor and transfer to a hospital. And also the hospital I'd transfer to is not the one that I want to birth at. So we went with the hospital, and we're planning our next birth at a birthing center. So, I mean, I feel like there's empowerment in having all the information.
Yeah.
But I mean, you do know that things can go wrong. I think you just never think it's going to happen to you.
Right. We have these visions in our head about how it's going to be. Also with parenting, which we'll get to, right? Like how we think it's going to look and how it's going to go. And we usually are surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the whole idea of, where the learning in life as we get older and we experience different things. I think what we learn is things are often not what we think they're going to be, but there's so much learning and then grown wisdom through the process. What I always think about this as a psychologist before having kids and after having kids, and how different my worldview changed. And I used to think it was easy before having kids. You just tell parents, like, do this with your kids and do this with your kids, and then this will happen. And then you have your own kids and they come in as these independent beings that already have these personalities and everything. So it changes everything. What, from your experience, before we talk about motherhood, from your experience as doulahood, what do you see and do differently from being a mom to now having gone through a pregnancy and delivery?
Oh man, that's like, how do I do what do I do differently, just like in my daily life?
Yeah, no, as a doula, like, is there anything now that with perspective of having done what you coach, right? Like I was at that same point as like, here's how to be a parent, even though I've never been a parent. And then I was a parent. And so,
I think before I had my daughter Jovi, I always was very supportive of whatever your birth plan is. Because it's not my plan. This is your plan. I think after having her, I became so much more passionate about having a birthing team that is supportive, because at one point when I was pushing her out, a nurse like busted into the room and was like, the OB on call, like, doctor whatever wants to know why you're not prepping her for a C-section right now. And my midwife advocated for me. And she's like, because she's literally pushing out the baby right now. And I know that if I was in a different hospital, I would have ended up in a C-section. Mm-hmm. And I think having a birth team that advocates for you is so important, because my birth would have been completely different if I was somewhere else. Completely different. They wouldn't have given my body that time. Like, it took me 7 hours to dilate 2 centimeters. And in some hospitals, they call that a failure to progress, and they will tell you that they need to do a C-section. Whereas there's no research that backs that up. So making sure that my clients, I mean, it's different because I'm at the hospital, but I still work with people now on developing their birthing plan. And the one thing that I always tell them is, look at the hospital statistics, the rates, the C-section rates, the VBAC rates, talk to your doctor, drill them. Like, we somehow have this thing that, like, doctors have this authoritarian figure over us, but I'm like, you hired them. They work for you. So you pick a doctor who's going to support your plan, get word of mouth, talk to people who have delivered at this practice, hire a doula if you can, and make sure that you are fully supported in your birth, because it could be such a different experience depending on where you're birthing at. So I feel like after having my daughter, I'm a huge advocate for that, if a doctor's not listening to you, switch practices. Like, if you're 38 weeks pregnant, that's fine. Like, if you're feeling uneasy with who you're with, switch. Like, you have to start advocating for yourself now. And then when you have children, you're going to be advocating for them. So you have to start advocating for yourself and your health now. I feel like that kind of ignited this fire in me, because I had this little baby that I'm like, I have to protect her. And if I can't protect myself, how am I going to protect her?
Well, and you seem like a very intuitive person, because what I'm hearing is that it actually strengthened and galvanized what you already believed. It almost like it just pushed it to the metal more.
Yeah, it did for sure. I think I became more vocal. I've kind of always been more of like a timid person. I wouldn't say timid, but like, my husband used to say, like, he would get mad at me because I was more of a pushover, and he'd be like, stand up for yourself. You need to stand up for yourself. Even with like stupid things. He'd be like, no, you call that company back and say, you give me a lower rate. And I'm like, I can't do it. And I feel like just after having her, it's like brought out definitely more of this vocal, like, no, thank you. I don't need that. Like just very more of knowing what I want, who I am, and like nothing's personal, right? It's just like,
right.
You just have to say what you mean, and that's it.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because you don't have to get big and scary and angry. It's really about internally just knowing where your boundaries and limits are, and then just speaking your voice and knowing that everything is your choice. No one can make you take a different rate or sign up for something, right? It's just kind of like standing your ground and being like, no, thank you. I'm good.
Right.
Yeah.
And before, I just had a really hard time with that. Still now, sometimes I'll be like, babe, you call, you do it.
Yeah.
But I definitely have gotten more vocal.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
So I was listening to one of your recent podcasts with Corey, Duck Dynasty Mama. And it was a great conversation. She has so much wisdom, right, that she imparted. And what I really appreciated about what you were saying is just really in a transparent way, talking about all of the fears that we have as parents, bringing a child in this world and raising them. And what would you say are like, what are those? We're going to work through those fears. Like, what are those biggest fears that like are whispering to you that you hear, but you're wanting to move through those, past those?
Yeah. I mean, I said like in that episode with her, I'm like, I'm just so scared I'm going to screw up my children.
Yeah.
And I think because when you bring like two people together, like my husband and I are trying to figure out how we want to parent, because there's things from our childhood that we look back on and we love, and there's a lot of things that we want to change. And I think that it's hard for me to try to figure out, like, she's only 10 months old, so I'm not like really having to parent yet. I'm still just like providing her for her needs. But like when that starts happening, like what do you do? Like, I can have like a hot temper, and which is something that is new. After I had her, I noticed that I had this postpartum rage, that I get really angry, and it's something I've been working through. And I'm not somebody who like just snaps and blows up. I'm not like a yeller. It's just like this internal, I see red and I'm like, I need to go sit alone before I like break something, because and trying to figure out where that's coming from. And I think the biggest thing is wanting to protect her, but also teach her about the world. And that's like one of my really big fears is, how do I teach her to know the things that she needs to know, like learning them at home versus maybe learning them somewhere else in a different way, but protecting her at the same time. And that's hard for me. But I think when I picture her, just because we have tons of nieces and nephews, so we're the youngest on both sides, so we've seen it happen. When your kids just like talk back to you or whatever, I'm like, how do you handle that situation? Like, how do I not be like, you're being a little asshole and go to your room? Like, how do I not say that?
Totally. And you know what? As as seeing when you are the youngest and, when you don't have the kids and you're seeing your nieces and nephews do and talk and say things and you're like, before you have kids, like, I would never let my child say that to me. And then all of a sudden, fast forward 5, 7, 10 years, your child says that to you, right? It's like, so you're right. It's like, what do I do? So first of all, that you're already having these thoughts about how are we going to raise our kids? How are we going to keep what we liked from our own families of origin? What are we going to change? I mean, honestly, that's over 50% of it, because that's that awareness. That's like, you're being like really mindful ahead of time, knowing that these things are going to come, but like you're really thinking about it. So first of all, like kudos, because that awareness is huge. And then I think the other thing that most of us have to contend with is parental fear. I mean, many parents describe never even, there's some parents who have lived life with anxiety and worries and fear. And then of course it gets transferred on to our kids. But there's also lots of people who didn't worry that much. And all of a sudden they have a child and they're like, oh my gosh, like I am worrying about this and this and this. And so I just want to normalize that and then say, it's again about being mindful and thinking, okay, that's down the road. Right now I got to deal with the present, right? Like right now I have a 10-month-old. Okay, now I have a 1-year-old. Okay, now I'm going to deal with terrible 2s or terrible 3s. It's trying to bring ourselves back to right now, because these are such important foundational years. Some people think 0 to 2 or 0 to 3, other people 0 to 5, and a lot of people 0 to 7. Like these years where you as parents are the primary experience givers, as you're talking about, are so key before our kids go into the world and then have other experiences that we often can't control and then have to help them navigate through.
Well, and something you said just brought it up for me too, though, like seeing the other kids. It's like, I feel like so many kids these days just don't have respect for like adults. And that's hard for me, because when I was a kid, I never would have talked to my grandma a certain way. I never would have talked to an aunt or an uncle a certain way. And these days, it just seems like kids sass off to everyone. So my husband and I talk a lot about like, how do we teach our kids to be respectful without also completely breaking their spirit,
right?
I want you to have, I'm really big on like, I'm not going to force my kid to hug you goodbye if they don't want to. I want them to learn that they have choices over their body. Maybe they're being shy. Maybe they don't get a good vibe from you. I don't know. But like being respectful, and I don't know, it's just like hard. You just see kids being so disrespectful these days.
Yeah.
But he and I were both really good kids. Like I don't think kids are necessarily bad. So that's like not good phrasing, but like we just were very go with the flow. I don't know if it's like because we were the youngest, but I hardly ever got in trouble. I wasn't a troublemaker till my 20s. Then I rebelled.
Yeah.
But it's just like kind of baffling some of the things you do see. I know that your kids, you are your safe space to your kids. So they're going to act out and push boundaries and do all of that. So I'll experience that more at home, but it's like out in the world. Like I want our kids to, like, instead of being like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, how do you want to contribute to society? Like, how do you want to,
right.
Like how you talk about just like being loving and engaging and healthy. Like that's all I want for my children. And it's like, how do we foster that?
Yeah. And again, you're leading with that intention. So when we talk about like, everyone has their own parenting plan of what's considered, quote, success. Like we always hear, like, raise a successful child. We like to broaden that idea with like, what does that mean for you? And what you're saying is, having a successful person, raising a successful person is someone who is caring, someone who is contributing, someone who is engaged, which is awesome. And in my experience, both like through my work and through my own raising of kids, that's what's important. I feel like the rest of the stuff gets worked out. Like it does matter what you do because we want people to be fulfilled in what they do. But that comes after. Those technical skills are, to me, secondary to how you feel as an individual. Do you have coping skills? Are you resilient? Are you caring and empathic? And because those kind of people who connect with people and benefit other people's lives, get stuff back, right? So how do we build a child that understands community? And those are already your guiding values as you're parenting. So when you get your first, maybe, shut up, I don't like you, you're stupid, I hate you, whatever those things are, right?
Yeah.
It is taking that deep breath and being like, okay, what are they trying to communicate? What situation are they in? What did I maybe trigger? Where are they nervous or scared? Because a lot of time kids are really pushing back, appropriately. For some reason or another, we just want to help give them different words, hey,
Mm-hmm.
and then we as parents have decisions to say like, go to your room. Don't you ever talk to me that way again. I'm taking away everything for, a year. Or is it, I see you sound really upset right now. Can you tell me what's going on? Or could you tell me you're upset in a different way? Right. I mean, there are all these options because I don't think it's like, how do we prevent our kid from ever talking like that or doing that? It's how are we going to handle the situation with our values when the situations arise?
Right. Right. And I feel like that's the hard thing. I also feel like there's information overload out there, which is something that I've recently decided I really need to limit myself on because what's going on around me, like really, I can I don't know, sometimes I can feel the weight of the world.
Yeah.
And there's information overload just even with parenting and stuff like that. And I think it's amazing to learn and to grow. I've followed some really great accounts on Instagram that I've been like, oh wow, I've never thought of it. Like similar to like what you just said. I'm like, oh, I've never thought maybe I could communicate this different way or I didn't know how to do that. But at the same time, I feel like we're downloading so much that it's like, okay, quiet the noise. And then when you're actually present, it also changes how you parent, right? Cause you see people who are just on their phones and then shut up, stop doing that. And they don't really know what's going on. It's so much easier to snap at your kid when they're being annoying, quote unquote, when you're just on your phone or not paying attention. So, I realized I just need to be a lot more present with my daughter and to maybe unfollow some people or limit time on my phone. It's hard when you work, right?
Yeah,
on your
right,
on your phone
right.
and computer, but just even setting hours for myself with that, and being more present, I realize makes me so much she's learning so much right now. She's teething, she's trying to walk, and her cries don't bother me. When she cries, I want to be there for her. I want to nurture her. I want to respond to her. And I can just see how if you're already annoyed, then maybe it could be more annoying.
Yeah. And your wisdom is coming through. I really, because you're talking about all of these really important things that have nothing to do with information and tools and have everything to do with you being grounded, you being present, and you being aware and responsive to your child. And I think that's what happens we have so much information. I mean, there's so much parenting information, child development information. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of great information, but how do we limit it so we don't drown out our own inner instincts, our own inner voice that's saying, I know my child's trying to communicate with me, or I'm completely distracted. I am just reacting because I'm distracted and I'm stressed. And if we can turn down the noise, like you're saying, that's the best thing that we can give our kids is that attention and that focus and being, and what we say, being regulated ourselves so we can respond to them authentically in real time.
Yeah. And it's definitely hard this day and age. I feel like you have to set those limits and those boundaries for yourself. Have you heard of a book called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin?
No.
So that's kind of what got me a couple years ago on this, talking about things that we want to pass down and things that we don't. It's about inherited family trauma. And it was very, very interesting and eye-opening to me to start to learn, what do we want to pass down? What don't we? And I definitely had some distracted parenting. I also feel like being the youngest, I was go with the flow. I had a nephew by the time I was 6 years old. So I became an aunt at that age. And my world revolved around everyone else's, which I don't think your world should revolve around your children. I was listening to one of your episodes where they were 13 things that parents don't do.
Oh, right.
That's like, don't make your entire world about your kid, which I think is important because they need to learn that we're all members to the family. We all contribute to the family. And we all, share time and ideas. And, but that book really got me into like being like, okay, what are the things that could have even been traumatic that happened, that it's not my parents' fault, right? Everyone's doing the best that they know how. My parents did the best that they know how. I grew up feeling very loved and didn't have like anything largely traumatic happen to me, but there was definitely some messaging that maybe I received that I'm like, okay, so how do I not do this to my kids? And it's cool because then my dad read the book and he loved it. And he was like, oh my gosh, I wish I had this 20 years ago. And it is hard though. I mean, it's you want to like learn what you can, that you want to like pass down and change the things. But it's like in those moments, like your kids are your mirrors and they're reflecting everything in you that like you want to change about yourself.
Yes.
And that's where it's like, I'm parenting myself, like although I'm not really parenting her yet, there's still things that like when I get triggered by something, I'm like, this has nothing to do with her. This is my own thing that I need to work through. And like, but I know it's just going to get harder when she can talk back. Right.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, for sure. But again, Liz, like that you are aware that she's the mirror and she's reflecting back to you yourself. And that, as we talked about in a recent episode about reparenting, and that, our job is to continue to parent and reparent ourselves as we grow and as we have these new, again, experiences and awarenesses. It's like, so why am I getting triggered by this behavior that this little person is doing so much, but this one I don't care at all, right? That's usually something about us. So again, you're aware of all this. And I think I understand the nervousness, the angst is, it's all the uncertainty. Like what's going to come our way? How am I going to handle it? And again, that's all future stuff, but you're totally poised to be aware of all these things in the moment when you're able to stay present.
I feel like it's just like easier said than done though. I might be aware, but like as soon as I have to really start putting it into practice, that's like where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen.
No, you don't. And as someone who has, worked with kids and adolescents and people come to for advice, it's like so humbling that when you're in the same situations that you have all these answers for in your office, that you're just like every other parent, drop to your knees of like some of the stuff, like, how do I deal with this? Or, oh my gosh, I so blew it. I can't believe I reacted that way. And, a lot of it's about being kind and then trying to learn from each moment.
I think in knowing like you're going to blow it at times, right?
Sure.
Like I know I'm going to lose it at some point and then I'm going to have to be like, I'm sorry, I lost it.
Yeah. Right. Which is huge because just that act of parents going back to their kids of any age and saying, you know what, I'm sorry. I didn't handle that the way I wanted to. And next time I'm going to try to do this. Like it doesn't negate what led to the actual reaction. But that is huge modeling for a child. And then there's repair in that as well. So stuff doesn't get harbored and, you can move on and the relationship can move on.
Yeah. I've started practicing that a little bit with my daughter now. I've realized that like if we're like playing on the floor or whatever, and I get distracted by my phone and I'm on my phone doing something and she comes up and kind of like hits my phone away or something. And I'm always like, you're right. I'm sorry. I need to put this away. And I like turn it off and I put it away, then like focus on her. And I always like use that as like my reminder. And I feel like it's good to like start learning how to like apologize and do that now. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big blow up moment. It can just be like, even for me, like, yeah, I need to put this away. You're right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So continuing and ending with the theme of awareness, we have the parent footprint awareness question for you. The parent footprint moment question. Tell us about a time when you had a new awareness about yourself as an individual or as a parent, and that new awareness had a positive impact on you, your child, or anyone you love?
So I'm going to do individual because I feel like I really haven't been a parent that long. Although I feel like parenthood's definitely full of awarenesses. But I think when I was like 27, I actually took a job in Tanzania. I worked at a safari lodge, which was really cool in the Serengeti. I had been traveling a bunch, and then I came back to Vegas and left again for this job. And I was there for like 6 months. And where I was at, I was very disconnected. I had a friend who was there with me for a few months, and then she left early to go home. So it was really just me and the workers. And I was very unqualified for managing this lodge. I don't know how I got this job, but I guess I was supposed to be there. And I didn't really have like good Wi-Fi or anything like that. So the last couple months I was a little bit lonely, and I felt like I had this awareness that in the silence is like where you actually learn so much about yourself. And in those moments of silence, that's where, I mean, hearing your thoughts is something that I think we all run from and that we're so good at drowning out now. And it's something I still do now. But when you're in those in the silence, you give yourself the opportunity to actually hear your thoughts, actually hear what you're going through, and then to actually accept it, like to accept yourself, to accept your thoughts, and then learn to love it. And that was definitely what I needed at that point in my life. I had been on a long healing journey from an eating disorder and a breakup and all this different stuff. And I was literally just like in silence in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have a TV, like
no distractions.
No distractions. And it was so freaking hard. I had a journal, I had some music, I had a very weak Wi-Fi connection that I'd like Facebook message my parents on. And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that you have to give yourself those moments of silence. Like you have to put down the distractions. Like if you really want to like understand like what's going on. And, but that's also really hard. Most people don't want that silence because the things that come up can be scary, but you can face it. So I feel like that was a time in my life where that awareness came, and it's something that even now I try to remind myself, like, I haven't done it yet, but I remind myself that I should. I'm like, hey, Jovi's been waking up around this time. Why don't you set your alarm 30 minutes early just so you can like go sit outside and have some peace and quiet in the morning before the day gets going, and like give yourself that silence. Like I said, I haven't done it yet. I tell myself that I need to, but it did bring up that awareness, like how important that silence like really is, and that it's definitely something that I need to incorporate into my life.
And to accept and love what comes up, right? Instead of those critical voices and that wanting to change. And we're like our hardest on ourselves. So it's like right? Taking the time and then just looking at them and embracing them.
Right. Which is hard, because then that's like, I feel like when you really start to love yourself. So if you're struggling with loving yourself, give yourself some silence.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I was like I said, I was listening to your podcast, and it's an honor to be on here. You have like such amazing guests, and I'm like I feel like underqualified to be on the show.
Not at all. Well, tell everyone where they can find your great podcast and Instagram and every place to follow you.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Miraculous Mamas. We are going to be doing some rebranding changes happening soon, but if you're subscribed to the podcast, you'll be along the ride for all of that. It's Miraculous Mamas on Instagram, or my personal Instagram is Sandoz, and I share some of my motherhood journey on there.
Well, thank you very much for sharing it all with us today. All right, everyone, that's the end of the show. You know what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to be the person that you want your child to become. He or she, they are always watching, they're listening, they're learning from us at all times. And ask yourself the guiding question that I ask myself every day. What footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummerman, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. If you are an advertiser interested in advertising on our show, go to midroll.com/ads. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com. Listen, subscribe, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.